Authentication is critical in any software system. In this video, we're going to see how we can set up authentication in microservice-based applications. And what you might be thinking is, well, we already have the Auth service. Why not just call that Auth service and get our JSON Web Token? And the problem with that is in the microservice-based architecture, it's actually possible to have a hybrid microservice in which, rather than we're communicating from the API gateway to the service, let's say for the instance in chat, we need to make a WebSocket connection from the client to that particular service. So we have a hybrid microservice. So we actually need to have authentication to protect those routes. So we need to have a guard, and we can have our Auth service, and that's all well and good, but we need to have a global Auth guard. And we can put the Auth guard in the shared library, and we can access that. And we can also have in the shared library, the database connection, the RabbitMQ connection. Every time we make a RabbitMQ connection to the microservices from the API gateway, for instance, or whenever we're establishing a microservice RabbitMQ connection from the microservice itself, we'll need to have the same environmental variables and setup. And likewise with the database, we need to also connect to that each time. So we want to be able to connect to the database from multiple services. So in this video, we're going to extend the shared library. We're going to create some dynamic modules, and we're going to start to see how we can start to use authentication in a microservice-based architecture. Let's go ahead and get started by creating a new service. So we can run the NestCLI, Nest Generate app, and then let's create the Presence app. And let's go ahead and go to Visual Studio Code. So we can see in the apps folder, we've got this new Presence folder here, got this new microservice here. So let's come to our environment variable here, and let's just create a new queue. So we can go ahead and just copy this queue down here. And let's actually just separate this onto a new line. And this will be the presence queue. So we can go ahead and we can save that. So we need to create another Docker container for that microservice. So let's just go ahead and copy this Auth microservice. So let's copy this here. So this is going to be the presence microservice. So let's call this presence. We're going to need a Docker file. So we can create a Docker file in the root of the presence microservice. And if we open up our Auth microservice, we can just go ahead and we can copy that code there. And we can paste that into our presence Docker file. So let's go ahead and we can save that. And we can now reference that Docker file there. It will build the it will build our presence microservice out. We can still reference the environment variables here. It's still going to depend on RabbitMQ, and it will also depend on postgres. But we can change our volume. We'll still want to detect changes from our root files to our Docker container. But we can go ahead and rather than starting npm run start dev, we can go ahead and run npm run start dev presence instead of auth. So we can just go ahead and we can save that. And then we can come to our API gateway and we can wait for our microservices to load. So let's just go ahead and save presence there. So if we come to our API gateway, and let's just close this up. If we come to our API gateway and we come to the app module here, what we can see is firstly, we have this auth service that we've connected to in the previous video, and we're going to need to reference all of the config variables, all of our environment variables, and then we want to connect. Now, we're going to need to do the exact same thing for each of the services that we connect to our API gateway. So the only real difference is what we're calling this service and also the particular queue. So it would be good if we had a dynamic module here that we could reuse, which we could just use those variables. And we actually have this library already set up. We used the NestCLI to just generate a library. And this code will be able to share across our different microservices. So if I open up this source folder, we can see that we've got this shared folder here. And the shared folder, it references the shared service. So we can actually just go ahead and we can actually just start to copy a few things over. So firstly, we're going to want to import the config module. So we have access to the config service. So let's just go ahead and get that. And then of course, we're going to need to import that from NestJS config here. So we can also create a static method on our shared module, because the idea is that we basically want to refactor all this code into its own static method that we can call, so we can register multiple RabbitMQ queues. So if you look at the documentation in NestJS for dynamic modules, essentially a dynamic module is essentially exactly that. It's importing the module, but we can put, it has some arguments, so we can have this auth service, but we can also have a presence service. So we can import that and the functionality dynamically. So that's what we want to do. So the way to do that is to create a static method on the actual module itself. So we can just go ahead and we can have this static method, and we'll just call it register RMQ. So this is going to take the service, which is just the string, and then it's also going to take the name of the queue, which is also a string. And what we're going to get back is a dynamic module. And while I'm here, I might just delete this folder here. Now that we're turned auto sync off. So let's go ahead and import that dynamic module. So I'm not getting the IntelliSense that I want. But we can just go ahead and import that manually. Oh, actually, it has imported manually, automatically. It's probably just erroring because we haven't actually returned a dynamic module. So basically what we can do here is we can return an object. and the object is going to have the module, and we can actually reference the own itself. So we're returning this particular module. And then this is where we can have our providers. So we can have our array of providers here. And our providers are going to consist of the particular service. So that's going to be equivalent to the auth service here. So let's go ahead and just label that like that. And let's just save this. And we can also use factory, because what that allows us to do is it allows us to make use of the config service that we've got from the config module. And we can just go ahead and give it the type of the config service. And this can just be an arrow function here. And this is where we can just essentially copy some of this stuff here, because we're still going to have access to those environment variables in here. So let's just go ahead and we can save that. So we want to return this thing here. And we still want to inject something in here as well. So let's just go ahead and copy this here. This will go just below here. Actually, let me just undo that for a second. And I will copy this part here. And then I'll go ahead and I'll import the client proxy factory from NestJS Microservices. I'll also import the transport from the Microservices package. And the queue, this is what we're passing into the dynamic module in the static method there. So we can actually just go ahead and use ES6 notation and let that be equal to that. So we can go ahead and we can save that. We do need to make sure that we have the config service. And finally, we need to actually inject the config service so we can make use of it. So let's go ahead and get that. So what we've done here is we've essentially made it so that we can call this method rather than having all of this code here. So I can just go ahead and collapse that. And actually we want to get the name of the service, which is just auth service. So I'll just go ahead and copy that. And the queue is what we're getting there. So essentially, we're no longer going to have this use factory config service. So let's just go ahead and delete this here. But in the providers, rather than having it in the providers, we can just go ahead and we can save this here. But we can now import that. So we can import the shared module here. So that's coming from app shared because that's what we called it. Let's go ahead and delete these now that they've been refactored into the shared folder. And now we have that static method where we can go ahead and we can register our RabbitMQ, and we can reference the name of the service, which is auth service. And then now we can just access the environment variable by process env dot rabbit And actually, let's just go ahead and copy this so we don't make any errors. From the environment file. So I can copy this RabbitMQ auth queue here. And I'll just move this here for a second. And that way we can have it there like that. So the benefit of doing this is, of course, our API gateway needs to connect to the presence microservice as well. So rather than duplicating all of that code, we can simply just copy this here and paste it in below. And we can just update the name and the queue. So we can have the RabbitMQ presence queue, and let's just call this the presence service, which we can go ahead and we'll be able to inject. And let's just go ahead and save that. Okay, so where that leaves us is basically in our app controller. We have this get method for the auth section, but we want to have another one for the present section. So let's just go ahead and copy this down here. And just here, we'll have the get request for the present section. And this is, again, going to be another hard-coded thing until we actually get some of the functionality working. So the difference is, though, rather than using the auth service, we can now inject the present service. So let's just go ahead and copy that down there. And this is the present service. So we'll just call this the present service. And we can just go ahead and we can just copy that. So we can reference the present service that we've injected through our dynamic module. And we can just call this something like get presence. So that's going to reference the presence file. So in the presence controller, we're going to need to deal with that. So in the same way that we've done our auth module or our auth controller, which is also a microservice, where we have this message pattern thing, we can go ahead and we can copy that. And we can do that for our presence service. So we can go ahead and we can open that. Now we're not going to need this get method here, so let's just go ahead and delete that. And let's just go ahead and paste in this message pattern thing here. And we can just rename this to get presence. Now we will need to import the message pattern and the context and the RabbitMQ context type. And we can just go ahead and use this present service that we've got here. Now, one thing to note is that we've been copying and pasting this. This would be better if it was in its own service because it's pretty much repeated every single time. So that would be good if it went into a shared service. So I'm just going to say, use the present service. And then let's just get hello here because that's what came by default. So we do need to register a few things. It's important to note that in the same way we've registered our microservice, we also want to connect to the database and RabbitMQ in a similar sort of fashion. So let's just take a look at our auth main file here. And I might just go ahead and close everything else here. So if I look at this main file here, we can see that once again we're doing this sort of thing where we need to go to all the access all the variables and then connect the microservice like this. This would be a lot better if this was in a shared section there, because when it comes to doing it in the presence main file, we're going to need to do the exact same thing again. So we can go ahead and we can set some of that stuff up. So let's go to our shared service to do so. And let's just open this up here. So right now we've just got an empty class that we can inject. Now we want access to the config service. So let's just go ahead and create a constructor. And we can create a private read-only variable here, so we can only access it within this class. And we can have the config service, which is going to be of the type config service. And then we can close our constructor up with the code block. Now, let's take a look at this. We can see that we're getting these microservice options here, which is going to have all this sort of stuff in here. Basically, this object here is what we want. So we can just go ahead and we can just copy that object in. We can also copy these variables in here. So let's just do that as well. So let's have this variable, this method here, and we'll just call this get the RabbitMQ options. Now this is going to depend on the queue that we're getting, which is just the string. And then we're going to get back the RabbitMQ options. So let's just get that by doing command dot and importing that. So basically, if we copy and paste these variables here, we can get these in here. And then we can just go ahead and we can just return this object here. And that will lighten the main file for all of our microservices. So let's just go ahead and return that. Now, we will need to call this .config service, because now we're injecting that in the class, so we need to reference it. We need to import transport. So we can get that in from microservices. And then queue, once again, it can just be the queue. And let's just go ahead and save that. So we can see what we've done here is we've effectively made it so that this main file here can be shortened. So if we just close this up to make it a little bigger, effectively what we can do here is we can get rid of all of this here. And we can just say, okay, we've got our app, and then we've got our shared service that we just created. which we can get from the app itself, but by accessing the shared service from our library. So what we can do with that, and we can just go ahead and we can delete this here. And let's just cut this down here. So we've got our shared service. So we can actually just go ahead and we can get our queue by calling the config service that we've just found or referenced. And then we can go ahead and we can get the RabbitMQ auth queue. So that's the queue that we want. And then that means we can make use of that by connecting our microservice by putting in the particular shared service for getting the RMQ options based on the queue. And we can see that this has significantly reduced the amount of code in here, but it's also made it so that we can reuse this in our presence main file. So let's just go ahead and open that. So we've got this presence main file here. So essentially we can just go ahead and we can just copy this. So I'm just going to copy everything inside of the bootstrap function. And we don't want to listen to port 3000 because we just want this to be a microservice. We will potentially make this a hybrid microservice in the future. But just for now, let's keep it simple. The difference is we don't want to use the auth module. We want to reference the presence module. We will need the config service, and we will need the shared service. And let's just go ahead and move that import down. So essentially the same thing, but rather than reference the auth queue, we can reference the presence queue. And all the rest of it will be the same there. So we can just save that file and we can close them both up. So now we've sorted that out, we can go back to our shared service here. And one extra thing we can do here is we mentioned before that, for example, in our auth controller here, we're doing this thing where we've got axe turned to false. So we need to acknowledge things so that RabbitMQ can detect if the message has been received by the service, and then we can acknowledge that. So let's just go ahead and copy this bit of code here. And in our shared service, we can have a method and we can just call it something like acknowledge message. So that's going to take the context, which is the RabbitMQ context. And essentially it's not going to return anything. It's just going to acknowledge the particular message. So let's just call this message here rather than original message. And that's pretty much all there is to this here. So we can start to use that a little bit. So for example, in our auth controller, what we can do, let's just get a little bit more space here. We've got our auth service here, But we could also have our shared service here as well. So let's go ahead and inject that. So this can be a read only. I might make this read only as well. So this is the shared service of the type shared service. And that's coming from app shared. Let's just go ahead and cut this down here. So rather than having all this stuff here, we can just say this dot shared service dot acknowledge message, and then we can pass in the context there. And then we can do the same thing for the just here as well. And then we also have the presence controller, which we did a similar sort of thing. So we can just cut that, paste that in there like that. And then we will just need to inject that shared service. So let's go ahead and do that. And we can save that, and then we'll just need to import that as well. And then we can save that. Okay, so we've set up our shared service, our shared module. One of the other things we'd want to set up is the Postgres database module. So because we're connecting to the Postgres database, and we might want to do that in multiple services, we want to also create a place where we can connect to that. So it's best if we have that in the shared library. So let me just open up the... So far we've only connected to it in our auth module, or could be in the main file. So in the previous video we saw that we set it up like this with the migrations approach. We're going to go back to the development mode. So let's just go ahead and open up the shared module. And actually, let's just create another module, because we might not necessarily want to import all of the stuff, because we might only have the Postgres database in some of the services. So let's just create this file here, and let's just call it Postgres DB. I'm calling it Postgres DB rather than just DB, because we will probably have another database. So let's just create a module here. So let's just copy this module here, just so we can get the some of the boilerplate. So let's just go ahead and get some of this stuff in here. Now we're not going to need a lot of this stuff here. We won't need this, for example. So we can come to importing our module. We'll need the config module and the config service and type RM. So we will need the config module because we can import it all. And then rather than doing this stuff here, oh, and by the way, we want to call this the Postgres DB module. We won't need these here. We can go ahead and we can save this here. This for feature thing, that can be, we can just leave that in here. And that's another good thing is our entities will be referenced in the particular module. but the actual connection can be refactored here. So essentially we can more or less just uncomment this here. We can delete this here. So we got the Postgres database with the Postgres URI, and we're going to auto load the entities, and we're going to have synchronize on for development mode. And that means we can pretty much just save this file here, and let's just copy the name of the module. So we can close this here. And that means in our auth module, we don't really need any of this stuff anymore. Here, so we can just go ahead and, okay, let's just undo that there. We can just import the Postgres DB module. And we're also going to want the shared module, because the shared module is going to have an auth guard in it, and we're going to want to make use of that. So let's go ahead and import that. So things are looking good so far. Now, we do want to create a auth guard. Now, this is just going to be, we're going to implement all the details like bcrypt and JSON Web Tokens and all that stuff in the next video. This video is more focused on setting up for that. So having all of our library and dynamic modules and the understanding of how everything fits together in the microservices architecture. So implementation details, that's going to be in the next video. But I do want to come to our shared stuff here. And basically, I'm just going to create like a simple service here. So just temporarily, I'm going to call this the auth.guard. So a guard's just nothing but a service that we can inject. So if I just copy this service here, for example, then I can get the injectable annotation there and just delete most other stuff. So let's do that. And actually, we don't even need anything in here at the moment. Don't need any of this stuff here. Really, all we need is the injectable annotation here. We can just save that here. And then we can just have some basic method here. I'm just going to say has JWT, and then I'm just going to return some object which has the JWT, and I'm just going to hard code this to token. So let's just get rid of the constructor as well, just because we don't need it at the moment. So it ended up being something really, really simple here. So now that we've created that, we do need to set up our presence stuff. So let's just go ahead and close a few files here. So if we open up the presence controller, Well, firstly, let's open up the presence main file. We see that we've connected that in the same way what we've done in the auth file. So if we go to the presence controller, you can see that we're making use of that get presence message there. And we're using the service there and stuff like that. So if I look at the presence module, now the presence module, it's just going to need the shared module, because the shared module has the shared service. So let's open up our auth folder here. And we can just go to the auth module. So we can just copy this thing here from the imports. So let's just go ahead and paste that in there like that. And then we can just go ahead and import the config module here. And also the shared module. Okay, so we've got our presence module set up. We've got our app controller communicating to our auth, to our presence service. Our app module is registering the that's the auth module. The app module is referencing these two microservices, all well and good. Let's have a look. Our shared module handles those there. We've already seen the auth controller and the auth module. So that's okay. And our auth service has, if we just have a look at our auth service, we're just having this method in here. So in the auth controller, we're referencing that. We will need to add in a login method and a register method and stuff like that. But for now, we've got our hard-coded presence get hello thing here. So that's what we're returning. So essentially, if that get presence thing works, we can see that our RabbitMQ connections are working as per our shared module, and also the postgres stuff is working here. We're able to connect to that, and then we got this simple auth guard. Now this we will need to connect up in the next video. So let's just go ahead and try all of that out. So let's just open up the terminal and let's run a Docker compose up build, and we'll just wait for that to load. So one thing to note is in our Docker compose file, when we're looking at the presence, even though the Docker file is the same, we probably do want to just have presence here. So that's just one thing to make a note of. So we can rerun our Docker compose up build command now. We can just make a couple of tweaks here. We no longer need this data source options import. So we can get rid of that. And we sort of want to try out our shared service. So we kind of want to try importing our auth guard. So let's go ahead and do that. So this is just a temporary thing. So I might just have a note here, temp. And then we can have our private read-only auth guard. And this is going to be of the type auth guard, which is what our maybe we're not exporting that. So let's come to our shared module here, and we'll need to export that. So yeah, we can just come to the exports in this shared module here. So around here, we want to reference the auth guard both here and also here. And then of course, importing that. Now, we need to call this auth guard as well. So we can save that. That means we should be able to import this here. And that means we should be able to bring that in like that. And all I really want to do is I want to acknowledge that. And then I just want to do like a console log of that in the presence controller here. So let's just do that. So again, this is a temporary thing. So we can just go ahead and console log this auth guard has JWT, and that should just give back false. So let's check that out. So firstly, let's go open up Postman, and we might need to rerun this. So looks like the present service is up. Okay, so the auth service is a provider. Is it part of the current app module? Module here. App module. So we're referencing the present service here.
Okay, so just for the time being, I've commented out this shared module. We're going to address this at the beginning of the next video. And I've just uncommented what it originally was, where we have the auth service and the present service. So with this, if you go to Postman, you know, the auth stuff still works. And we're still getting this hello world from the presence endpoint there. So just to look at that, if we look at the presence controller here, it's actually receiving that from the API gateway. It's going to map it to that. And then we've got this console log 1, 2, 3 here. And then you can see that we're getting this hard-coded JSON web token. So in the next video, we're just going to fix up that dynamic module there. And we're going to actually implement bcrypt and JSON web tokens and all that sort of stuff. So please subscribe and stay tuned for that one, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.